So, very good afternoon to all of you. Today, again, we are going to discuss on the topics of the basics of Java. So, in our previous classes, we have talked on some topics of Java of object-oriented programming, right? Just a minute. So today we are going to discuss on more topics on about the Java. So the first topic today we are going to talk on this Java static keywords. So we are going to discuss on the topic of Java static keyword. So in this part or in the context of this Java static keyword, what is the part about? What is all the things we will discuss? So this static keyword, the term, the static keyword is used mainly in object program or Java for some memory management purpose. Okay, so the static keyword in Java is used for memory management purposes. So the static keywords will be applied on some variables, on some methods, on some blocks that have a direct connection with the memory, right? So when we are actually talking or when we are actually assigning any variable, any block or any method that is having a certain space in our memory, so to manage that particular memory, the static keyword is actually used. So where it actually belongs, the static keyword, the main thing is that the static keyword actually belongs to the class. Means when we are actually trying to create a program, we actually mention some class. So the keyword, this type of static keyword belongs to the class, right? So the static keyword actually belongs to the class. So it is actually assigned in a particular classes where we are going to use many type of static variables, static methods or block, anything, right? So the talking about this static, what are the part of the static, what can be the static, or what are the types of the static? So the static, as I said, that it can be a variable, right? Secondly, the static can be a method. Okay. Third one, the static can be a block. Okay. So these are the types where we can actually assign the static keyword. So static variable, some method, some block where we can describe some type of statically part, right? And all of these are connected actually. So the statics were assigning some variables, some methods, some blocks, or actually have an interconnection between them. So first, the term or first point here as the static, the variable. So when we actually declare any kind of variable mentioning some particular value, suppose x equals to 10, here we have already mentioned a value of the x, right? So x is actually mentioned with a particular value, that is x equals to 10. So here it is a static variable. So when we are actually trying to declare any variable as static, it will hold a memory in our memory block, right? So a static variable. So this static variable, when we are actually creating a static variable as x equals to 10, when a value is defined, so that variable value cannot be changed, right? So it will be that particular static variable we are going to use throughout our program whenever it is necessary, and it can be used or referred in all of the particular program. So the value of x is already fixed, so we cannot change this particular value. So the static variable, when we are actually declaring or assigning a variable with a particular value, that will have a storage or that will get some memory in our memory management block or in our block of memory, right? So this static variable, what happened that we have assigned and a memory was already assigned for this particular scenario, right? So as I said, a given particular term, suppose x equals to 10, it is a particular static kinds of variable. Now coming to the next part of this static variable, that we may create a static variable or we have another kind of variable that is known as also dynamic variable. Means we didn't mention, we are not mentioning any kind of value of that particular variable. So as at in the beginning of when we are learning something, we always refer to the static variable, but when we actually learn the thing and going to apply some advantages process for some advantage of the basics, then we are trying to shift to the dynamic part scenario, right? So static and dynamic both type of variable can be there. Now the part is that static method. The next part, if we are going to talk about the method. So this static method means when we are actually trying to solve a program, we always, as a person, means suppose a person one has a particular approach, person two have a particular approach, person three have a different type of approach. So method is actually depending upon the person or the programmer who is actually going to do the program. So for a particular individual person, it can be a static, but considering other person or the person n number of person, there can be n number of methods, not actually n number of methods. The methods for a particular problem, maybe 2 or 3 type of methods we can follow, but a static type of method is actually belonging. So this static method that belongs obviously to a class, because whatever the things, the variables method are all are actually coming under this particular class, right? Creating an object that is going also to the part of the class. So the static method, we can include creating an instances of the class or access any static type of variable or a data member. So static method can also be part of the, means that is the part of a program that is again following or coming to the part of any classes, right? And block, again a particular scenario of the static block, if we are talking about that, execute the total part, considering a program, the block of a program, that is the scenario of a static block, right? Now there is a question from me, from my side to you people, that can we execute a program without any main method? Can we execute a
No,
program without a main method?
no, sir.
No. Okay. Why? Can you explain?
Sir, because it is the starting point of the program.
Okay, fine. So in the case of this object-oriented programming or Java, or we can consider also C, C sharp, C++, this type of programming languages, we always need to invoke either any kind of some header files, either any kind of some main method. Without that particular scenario, we cannot run a particular program, we cannot execute a particular program, or at the time of compilation, there will be some errors, right? But with coming from the topic, a little bit off topic, that when we will advance for the further programming languages, like if I talk about some Python. So in Python, we don't need that much type of main methods, right? Do you need any type of main methods in the Python?
No, sir.
Why? Have any means any of you are familiar with Python? Means how this Python work, how the Python programming languages work?
No, sir.
Okay, fine. So the thing is that C basics means in the beginning C, Java, these are the basic languages that we need to know. But now the technology, or depending upon the current scenario of the CSE domain, the technology, the trending technologies have get in an advantage position, right? So the scenario is most of the things have been shifted to this data science or data type of scenario where this Python, MATLAB, this type of programming language have a huge impact. So this type of language, when we are actually opting for this type of language, our main target, our main aim is to use minimum number of memory blocks, means shorten the memory space and shorten the time, compilation time, so that we can have a output in a minimum number of time, minimum time period, right? So the language, the programming languages that was developed for this upcoming period or that is going on, that have a rich library, means the library, the whole set of libraries, the main method, all the things have invoked into the library section, into the compiler section, the Python library section itself. So you don't need to mention any other type of main methods, any other type of header files in the programming languages. You just write what you need to do. Suppose I'm trying to write or print a hello world. Just write print hello world. That's so how it performs the print. So all the things, the purpose of the print, all the things were already put up into the rich library of the Python section, Python language library. So that's why we don't, that as the time will advantage, as the scenario will advantage, get upgraded, this type of things will be there where we don't need to write any type of methods, we need to write or don't need to write any type of header file. This type of scenario actually comes when it gets upgraded into the scenario. So this is another part, because when you will be in the 5th or 6th semester, you will have the subject of data science where the things will be done through the Python programming languages, right? Okay, so this is the scenario, means the part, it can be static, whether it can be dynamic, whether we need to write a header file, we need to write a main method, depending upon what languages we are going, what language we are choosing for, right? Now, just a minute. Think next we are going to talk, as in our previous classes we have started some of the parts of this inheritance. We have given the idea of some inheritance or some polymorphism. These are the basic parts we have discussed. In this context, one thing that also needs to be discussed, that is known as the part of constructor. That is known as the part of constructor. So what a constructor is? So if we talk at what a constructor is, so a constructor is a block of code. When we are writing a program, obviously some codes or lines of code have been written. So a constructor in the case of Java programming, it is a block of code. In a simple way, we can talk a block of code that refer maybe as a method. Now, this is called, this constructor or this method, the constructor method is called when we are going to create an instance of a class. So instances of the classes will be created. So when these instances of the classes will be created, some codes of block that is referred as the constructor method is called. And when we are calling this constructor or this constructor method at the time of instances of the classes is created, the memory for the object is allocated. So for whatever the object we are going to create, also it will hold some memory. So the constructor will be a block of code when an instances of the classes is created. Now this method, why constructor? Because all the things are method, all the things are blocks of code. Then why the name have been given as constructor? So it is a special type of method. The constructor is a special type of method which is used why when we are going to initialize the object. Class is created, fine, no issue. So when the instances of the class, means the object is going to initialize, at that time this special type of constructor method is created. So when, suppose every time we are going to create a new object, we are creating a new object, the constructor is called at least one time. So one constructor will be there when we are going to create a new object, right? So by default, or if we talk about the types of constructor, there are two types of constructor is actually present, right? What are the two type of constructor? One is known as default constructor, and second one is known as a parameterized constructor. So these are the two types or basic two types of the constructor we can talk about. So what is the part of this default constructor? Means suppose we are creating an object or instances of a classes, and we by default didn't create any constructor or we didn't call any constructor. So in that case, when the compile or when the code will be compiled, the Java compiler will provide the default constructor by the compiler. So a default constructor will be provided if a constructor is not called in the program. So at the time of compilation, the Java compiler will provide the default constructor by itself, right? So this typing of constructor, right? We were talking about the default constructor or parameterized constructor. So default means we didn't mention anything. The compiler will assign or create a default constructor into the scenario. Now at the type of this parameterized constructor, to create an object, we are mentioning or we are actually creating or calling a particular constructor, right? So the thing is, when there is a default constructor, so we have two terms, default and parameterized. So it clearly simplifies that we don't need to write constructor. We are writing a constructor, that is good, that is fine. But if we are not, what happens if we not? So if we didn't mention any type of constructor or we didn't call any type of constructor, so that compiler will create a default constructor if our class does not have any type of constructor, right? So the constructor, it is called at the time of object creation, simply the type of object creation. So the thing is, the two terms default constructor, if we didn't mention, that will be default assigned by the compiler, and if we are mentioning, that is a parameterized constructor, that is known. So why or how, what are the rules for creating a Java constructor? So as I said, there may be default or there may be parameterized. So what are the rules of creating a Java constructor? So the part of the topic or the rules of creating a Java constructor. The constructor, if we are trying to create, the name of the constructor must be the same as is the class name. The name of the constructor must be the same as is the class name. Secondly, it must have no explicit return type, right? So first one, the name of the constructor must be the same as the class name, and it must have no explicit return type. And moreover, the thing that when we're actually creating a Java constructor, we need to remind it cannot be any type of keyword, right? Or that abstract or the static or final, this type of things we cannot be clear or create as a constructor. So the constructor name must be the same as the class name, and also it must have no explicit in return type. Now, suppose we are trying to create a default constructor. Suppose what is the scenario? So let me write a program for you first, then it will be easy to talk or discuss, right? Just a minute. Just a minute, the system gets hanged. I'm unable to do anything. Just a minute. Okay, do one thing, just rejoin the class. The system gets hanged, so I have to restart my system. Just rejoin the link at the time, by the time I have restarting my system. Okay, just give me some moment.